How long do you want me to talk? Just as I didn't know where all you were going to lead me or take me, or
you'll get to be surprised.
okay. Yeah, that's when I found out it was you. I thought I got to make sure these are all correct statements that I make.
I'm going to check you. Right. This is Maury Miller, and it's August 18th, and I'm speaking with Bob Miller. And so the first question I'm going to ask you, Bob, is where and when you were born.
I was born September 11th, 1954, and I was born in Terre Haute, Indiana at Union Hospital.
And who were your parents?
My parents were Leland W. Miller, who was born and raised south of Marshall, Illinois, and my mother was Marceline Feltner Miller, who was raised in Sullivan, Indiana.
And you have some brothers?
I have 3 younger brothers, Kenneth, a year and a half younger than me, Rodney, that is 5 years younger, and James, who is 10 years younger than me.
Really spread out, aren't
They are, yes.
Okay. Well, talk about where you lived.
Okay. I grew up southeast of Marshall, about 3.5 to 4 miles. It was on the Zion Church Road. The Zion Church is a church in the community, and it's all known as the Zion Church Road. It is east of the Lincoln Trail State Park. It's on the family farm that I was raised in the house that my dad was born in 1929, and that's where we grew up on part of the Miller family farm.
How would you describe the neighborhood?
The neighborhood, when I was a child, was we had all boys in the neighborhood. Very few girls were born in the neighborhood, but it was rural ag. Everybody on the Zion Road was involved in agriculture and farming, and that's how we grew up, and that was just part of the thing of living down there. We were all farm kids, and we all interacted with a lot of different farm activities.
Tell about your neighbors.
My neighbors, a couple of the neighbor boys to the north were the Lindley boys, and we gathered together at a big oak tree every summer after school, and finally got all the poison ivy knocked down, and we would play there until everything that was there was dirt. And then to the east of us, there was a neighbor, had a couple of girls, twin girls, and we rode horses with them. And then down the road about a mile, then my uncle was there with my cousins.
Okay. We'll talk about some of the things about growing up. Talk about the chores that you had.
Okay, yeah. That was one thing about growing up as a young man or even a young woman in a farming community. We all had responsibilities and chores. It was all ever since we'd get big enough to pump water, we all had chores to do as far as pumping well water for cattle and hogs. All of it at that point in time was hand and manual labor. We learned to carry 5-gallon buckets. We every farm had a few chickens. They all had some pigs. All had cattle, and there was just a lot of labor and intense work that went on the farm, and that's how a lot of farmers made it. They used their family labor to do the chores and things like that.
Well, you talked about the chores you did. What about playtime? What do you remember about play?
We did get playtime. It's not that we worked all the time, but where I grew up, we had a woods behind the house, and there was always time to take off of an afternoon or a morning and go down to the woods and play. We had a lot of battles in the woods. You know, I know it's not politically correct, but we had a lot of cowboy and Indian wars, and we fought a lot of Germans growing up, you know. But we found grapevines to swing on. We found trees to climb. We had several creeks around that we learned to skip stones and things like that. We had every farm had a big barn or two, and there was always hay in the hay mow, and there was a lot of tunnels and forts made in hay mows where you could play. If the weather wasn't good outside, you went in the hay mows and played.
What about church?
Church, as when I grew up, was a very integral part of my life. My parents and all of my family was raised with church being a very basic part of life. The church I attended for 57 years was a mile away. The church was the social gathering place for our communities and our families. A lot of families stayed pretty close, and that's where you met everybody on Sundays, and you had Sunday morning worships and Sunday evening worships. You had ice cream socials. You had Tuesday night prayer meetings, but the church played a very integral part in the social aspects of the community that I grew up in.
Okay. Let's talk about school. Where did you go to school?
I went to school in Marshall, Illinois. I started out at the old Ohio building, which was the kindergarten when I started in the fall of 1959. And then from there I went to what was known as the South School. I was fortunate enough, as when I went into first grade, that they had the new wing built, and went through first, second, and third and fourth grade there, and then in fifth and sixth grade I was in the old two-story school at the South School, and a lot of fond memories there. But that was your first time of meeting a lot of other kids, because being out in the country, you didn't socialize a lot with kids in town, and so you got to meet a whole other group of kids. And then from grade school, then went on to the junior high and the high school at Marshall then.
And what are your school memories about junior high and high school?
Junior high was a little tough because being a country boy, you finally got to be completely mingled with the town kids. The town kids went to the North School in Marshall, and junior high was the mixing ground where we were all blended together, and just like any teenager trying to find who you could associate with and be with and become friends with. But junior high was a little bit of a different experience, and high school was the time when personally my wings began to develop, and I became a class officer my sophomore year in high school, and was vice president of my sophomore, junior, and senior year. And I ran my speech, when I made my speech to run for vice president, I based it on Abe Lincoln. I was a country boy. I grew up out on a farm and worked my way up, and that being a farmer, I was very honest, and I think that's what persuaded everybody to vote for me.
What other school activities do you remember?
I did play sports one year, but it was being involved in sports and spending a lot of time in town, and that was just hard when you lived out in the country and your parents were involved in agriculture. So I did play 1 year of sports, being that I decided that agriculture was going to be my career, my livelihood, and what I wanted to do. I was very involved with the FFA program in school, and I was also involved a lot in 4-H, but being a class officer also got me involved in class activities, and I belonged to science clubs and math clubs, and then was selected to the National Honor Society as a junior in high school, and that opened up some doors. And probably one of the best things that ever happened to me in high school was to take a speech class, and was involved in some debates, and that really kind of brought me out of my shell to get in front of groups and to speak, and that's paid big dividends in my life.
Let's talk about family life. What family activities do you remember?
Family activities growing up, like I said, we played a lot together, but there was always, we were very self-sufficient. Like I said, we had pigs and chickens and cows, and we always had a garden or two, and so there was always some of those activities to do around gardening and work like that. I remember in the wintertime going to the basement, cracking hickory nuts on the old stump and picking them out. That was a thing that we did. We didn't have a lot of extra income growing up, and so we would go swimming at one of the lakes at Paris, Illinois, up at Twin Lakes. And then as I got to be in high school and a little more mature, my dad allowed us to start swimming in our one of our farm ponds, and we made us a sand beach, and I got some neighbor guys I got to know, and we built us a diving board and things like that. But family, with having, my dad had 7 brothers and sisters, and so we spent time with cousins, and we would have a lot of special occasions, Thanksgiving, Christmas, Easter, birthdays. We'd have family get-togethers, and we spent a lot of time with cousins, even though there was a big age spread between my cousins and myself. I have 27 cousins, and there was an age difference there, but we had cousins in Detroit that would come down and visit, and we always had a good time. So growing up as a kid, those are the things that I really remember: the family times, and a lot of family-oriented activities.
Okay. Did you have hobbies? Did you have a pet?
We always had pets. Living, we always refer to it, living on a Zion Church Road. It seems like you always had a new dog every year or two because of the traffic. When your dog would get hit by traffic. But always had dogs. Of course, always had the farm cats around. But once I got into 4-H and I had beef and swine as projects, those animals become a part, but for a short time. But it also taught me a lot about responsibility and the fact that those animals were raised to be sold, and they weren't going to be long-time pets or anything like that. But those were the things. But yeah, we always had some special dogs that we can remember, Blackie and Tippy. And I'll never forget one summer we had one dog got underneath the granary, and she finally brought her pups out. She had 8 pups. So those were one things, and we always tried to keep the female dogs, when it was time for them to come in season, you'd find an empty building or a corn crib and put them in. So you try not to have too many puppies during the year.
Did you ever live away from Marshall?
No, I never did live away from Marshall. The house that I grew up in, I stayed there till I was 19 years old. I got married when I was 19 and moved a mile and a half away in a great aunt and uncle's house that I was able to purchase from some family members. And so I've been a very close-knit person to where I grew up.
Well, how did you meet your wife?
Which one?
First wife.
Okay, yeah, that's an interesting question. I've had 2 wives. That's just kind of the way life gets to be once in a while. But my first wife I met in high school, and she was a cheerleader. And that was one thing I always told the guys about not playing sports. I could spend time in the bleachers with the cheerleaders and other girls, But I met her in high school. We got married right out of high school. And since I was going to be a farmer, I didn't go to college. And she was, this was in 1974, and she was intent on being a homemaker. And she worked out of the home for a couple of years till we decided to have children and went like that. So we were just high school friends, and then become married then.
And talk about your children.
My children, I have been very blessed. I have 3 daughters. The oldest one is 39. She lives in Los Angeles, California, works for the Mattel Toy Company. My second daughter is a CPA. She's 35 and lives in the northwest suburbs of Chicago. My youngest daughter is 32 and just lives north of the downtown area, and she works with marketing for a cosmetic company. The girls, they had their chores to do at the farm, and when I would come home when they were little, I would come home at noon on a Saturday, and my wife would say, I've been having trouble with the girls. I would take them to the farm and give them an attitude adjustment. So we would work in the farrowing barns, giving shots to little pigs and things like that. And they did not like that at that point in time, but once they got into college and they would tell that story about the attitude adjustments, it went a long way towards their careers and who they would work for and everything. But kind of wish I had some sons, but I had 3 daughters, and they've moved away, which is a little different, not having them close at home the way I was raised, with everybody being really close-knit and just down the road. But I wanted them to get out, see the world, and they've done
They
that
did,
very well,
okay.
yes.
Okay, well, talk about being a farmer. You said you had made a decision early on that was going to be your livelihood. How did you come to that decision?
Well, I just, being raised on the farm and just being able to work with animals and to watch corn and soybeans grow, working the ground, tilling the ground, planting the seed, watching that plant go and having the harvest, it was just a natural thing for me. And what really secured that was when I was a sophomore in high school, there was a farm coming up for sale, and my dad asked me, "Are you sure you want a farm?" And I said, "Yes." And he said, "Then we'll go buy that farm." And that was pretty well what drove the nail home that we're going to be in the farming business. And my dad was very good. He gave me part of the farm as my pay. I was able to plant the crops and harvest the crops and sell the grain, and that's how I got paid. But that was really, like I said, I had the feeling and just that I wanted to be a part of agriculture. And when I was a sophomore in high school, Dad says, "All right, you going to do it or not?" And that's what kind of was the driving force behind that.
Well, Bob, I know that that's not all of your life. Talk about some of the other ways you spend your time.
I have watched, as growing up, I would watch farmers that was their main goal and their main drive in life, to work hard and to provide for their families. I think that was part of the German heritage I grew up with, that you worked hard and you provided for your family, and that was it, and then you didn't have a lot of time for extra things. I had watched that and seen that, especially in my dad's life. He had no other activities, and I made it a point that I was going to find other things in my life to do. And so I became involved with a lot of ag groups in the area, the local pork producer association that promotes pork products by going to fairs and cooking food items made out of pork. I became involved with the University of Illinois Extension Service. I served on the Extension Council for several years. I helped back in the 70s when we decided to build a new extension building. I helped work on that project a little bit. I've also worked with Farm Bureau. I've never been on the Farm Bureau board, but I've been involved with Farm Bureau. I was a 4-H leader for 15 years to work with youth in 4-H. I've served on, I'm currently serving on a board of directors for an ag co-op, ag retail business, and that keeps me pretty well informed on new things that are happening in agriculture. Then, besides that, I took up running about 20 years ago, and I've also got involved with a local theater, and would be in a couple of plays during the year to get away from being a father, a husband, and a farmer. It gave me something else to do. I went through lay speaking school through my church, and I've been filling the pulpits off and on in different churches for about the last 30 years then. So I've spoke to different ag groups on different issues as time has gone on in the past several years. So those are some of the things that I do. And this is one thing that I do that we were not able to do growing up on the farm is I do farm with 2 other brothers, and we make it a special point that we take vacations. It's time, you have to take time during the year to get away and just let somebody else worry about everything.
So that speech class you took in high school, really?
That's why I mentioned that. That speech class in high school was probably one of the best classes I ever took, because it forced me to stand in front of people. It strengthened my ability to speak my opinions, and that has probably taken me farther in my life than anything else.
Okay. Bob, I have a few other questions. I've got just general kinds of questions. Was there a person or event, as you think about your whole life, that was a major influence on your life?
One of the first ones that comes to my mind is my dad's brother Richard, my Uncle Richard. He was one of the uncles that lived close by, and I grew up working with him. He taught me a lot. There was a few times he kind of yelled at me for a few things, but that's just part of it. But that's the best part, because it's coming not from your father, but it's coming from somebody that wants you to do good and succeed. So he was probably a good influence and a thing that I remember as far as being in agriculture. And the second person that comes to mind was a former landlord, and I consider a saint of the church I grew up in, and his name was Robert C. Maurer, that really instilled a lot into me of good work ethic, being involved in community, and always keeping God and church first in your life.
Okay. As you think about, again, your whole life and all the things that have happened historically, locally, nationally, internationally, what particular things stand out in your mind?
Oh, wow. As I grew up, living in a very homogeneous type surrounding of being a close-knit family and a small farming community. As I grew up, which would have been the late 60s and early 70s, those things probably have a lot of impact on my life. Watching how we as a country changed through that point in time. And as the older I get, the more I understood how those things kind of worked, as far as the kids in the 60s and 70s, their parents grew up through the Depression and World War II, and they wanted life better for their kids than they had for themselves. And I think as we got from that point on and we become free in our society, I look back now at my age now, being 60 years old, thinking those are all natural things that happen through the course of a person's lifetime, but those things probably impacted our country as much as anything and before that had happened. And so I guess that's the one thing about the 60s and 70s, just kind of the things that kind of popped out as we expanded ourselves, and now we gather ourselves back and wonder why we did those things, but those were growing opportunities. And then just to see that as time has gone on through media, communication, technology, the world has become so much smaller. We see things on a minute-by-minute basis now that we didn't see years ago. And so those are probably some of the things that I really remember the most, that as I sit back and look, probably impacted a lot of where I'm at today. Okay,
well, let's expand on that a little bit. You talked about growing up and everything was done by hand and so on. What modern conveniences do you think have had most
Oh, wow, I was ready for that question, because you know, agriculture changed a lot in the generations before me. I know my dad, my uncle, they grew up with horse-drawn equipment as children, and then finally got into smaller tractors, and you went from a lot of hand labor into more mechanized ways of farming and agriculture. And when I grew up, John Deere A and B with the putt-putt engine to 40-20s that we didn't have cabs on them, but boy, we had lights and had plenty of power. And I remember back in 1967, my dad finally allowed me to buy a fender mount radio for a 40-20, and you could put that radio right on the fender and turn it up and listen to it, you know. And then all of a sudden, when the 70s got here, more modernization of equipment. We started putting cabs and air conditioning and heaters and radios, and the comfort level went up. And what that did then was allowed you to farm more acres because you could farm longer. You weren't as tired because there wasn't so much manual labor. And now I'm just so excited at my age, the technology that we have with GPS, automatic steering. It's just it's just unbelievable what we can do with our equipment. It's not as physically demanding as it was. You're not having to drive that tractor and stay on the row or follow the planter marker, but it allows us to track more things. In our farming operation, all of our equipment has GPS steering. On my combine, I'm able to harvest on a foot-by-foot basis. I know what my yield is on a foot-by-foot basis. All of our land that we have soil tests done on is done with GPS on a 3-acre grid, and so we can overlay the maps of the soil test map and the yield map and determine how much fertilizer that we need to put on specific areas in the field, and not just broadcasting it as a whole unit. So we're able to manage our cost. We're able to take care of the environment better by not over-fertilizing or overusing chemicals. And it's just, the technology has given us just so many opportunities to improve everything in agriculture. It's just amazing. And the things that we do with, instead of putting in drainage ditches, we put in tile to alleviate those wetter areas in the field. We can manage the quality of our grain so much more. Different markets have opened up, specialty markets have opened up for different products and everything. And even from the livestock side, we've become more vertically integrated. We're more connected to the end user. The things that I have to do on my livestock farm now is daily, write down daily who goes into the barns. You write down daily what you do to those animals. You keep track of the feed that's going in, or any antibiotics, if you happen to use any antibiotics in your feed. There's just that traceability that is able to come back to the farm, but yet we can use that as a selling point as we go to the end user and say, we've monitored all the way back. We know how this animal was raised. We know the conditions it was raised in. And it's becoming just a part of our normal life now, that we've had to do those things. But size and scope, margins get very tight, and so it just comes back to size and scope and efficiencies. And it's today, not having more animals or having more acres makes you a more profitable producer, but it's using all the technologies and using the marketplace to capture a better margin is what it boils down to. It's just not hard work anymore. It's more planning and using your mathematical skills and the knowledge that you glean from other resources that put you above the curve with everybody else in agriculture.
Thank you. I have one other question. If you were to meet somebody who wasn't from around here in describing Marshall, how would you describe it and tell them why you live here?
Oh, gosh. I could be here for a long time describing that. Marshall was such a great town, just from the aspects that we have the small town atmosphere of porch lights being on, being able to stop and visit with people. We have, in the summertime, we have Friday night band concerts. We have updated our downtown area. It's friendly to just walk up and down the streets, and we've lost some downtown businesses, but it's a good community. It's well maintained, well taken care of. We have many churches in the area. Our school system is just an excellent school system. I mean, they still have problems and issues like about a lot of other places, but just the uniqueness of being small and the caring atmosphere is what really makes, in my eyes, makes Marshall a great place to live.
Thank you, Bob. You know what? People are really going to want to listen to this and read this. You've really got some good stories that you told there.